Welcome back to the Writer's Toolkit. This episode is part 3, Mentor Texts.
Hey guys, welcome back. This is the third video in the Writer's Toolkit selection series thing. And this episode we're going to be talking about mentor texts. Now, not everybody necessarily knows what a mentor text is. I didn't come across that term until maybe my second or third to last semester in college. So basically what a mentor text is something that, for me at least, does not necessarily mean just books. I include the movies and TV shows that I watch all the time in my mentor text list. If we're talking about books specifically, it's a book that you read over and over and over, and after the first read through, when it's just for pleasure and you figure out whether or not you actually like the author and their writing style specifically, it's the stuff that you go back and reread and pick up on more and more of the tricks that author has used and sort of start figuring out how to incorporate them into your own writing. Shows and movies, I'm just going to do a little tiny bit on them. But they can be really, really helpful, particularly if your weak spot is dialogue. Between movies and TV shows and just real-life observation, you should be able to pick up a lot of detail on what conversations should sound like, particularly in different sort of situations. For instance, when it's a group of really close friends versus when it's a group of colleagues versus family interactions versus these two people hate each other interactions. Just figuring out the different little ways in which people interact, especially for body language, because you cannot really get that from a book. You can get how to describe body language from a book, but the sort of motions that go along with certain feelings and conversation types. Like, you've probably noticed by now that I do a lot of gestural stuff, like I talk with my hands. That is actually super common in a lot of people that talk with their hands. And if they're not gesturing, they're doing what I was just doing and fidgeting, just picking up on those little nitpicky kind of details that will make the conversations feel a little bit more real to the reader. So that's TV shows, movies, and observation all wrapped up into one neat little package. But now we're going to move on to books. I'm just going to show you a few of mine. We're going to start with the portable library, which is what I call my Kindle/e-reader. I know there are people out there who are really, really anti-e-reader. I don't understand your point of view, but I'm going to let you have it. As somebody who had a 2-hour commute just to get to school and another 2-hour commute to get home from school for college, for after I transferred, I found the e-reader really handy because, yes, the battery dies sometimes, and that sucks, and it's not fun, etc., etc., etc. But this is a lot easier to carry around than something like, let's just use these, something like this that's floppy and not so fun. For those of you who have actually watched all of the videos, you'll recognize this from, let's call it episode 2 of the Writer's Toolkit series. I have a lot of books that are actually a lot thicker than that I really like to read, and those get really, really heavy, and when you have textbooks that you literally have to bring to class that are like this isn't actually one of the ones that I used, but I did have a book almost exactly the same size, on a 2-hour commute, on public transit, slugging it around a campus with hills, and carrying a recreational book is really not fun. So I am very pro e-reader. I also tend to be reading on this one when I go to sleep, mostly because it has its own backlight. And live-in boyfriend goes to sleep a lot earlier than I do, because he also wakes up a lot earlier than I do, mostly because he wants to get in a workout before he goes off to his class, and that usually requires a shower afterwards, so he wakes up at like 4 o'clock in the morning when we don't have to leave until like 7:15. So having a little backlit thing has been really helpful for that. I've got a lot of books on that thing, and I absolutely adore it. The book that I'm currently reading is the 4th book in the Emperor's Edge series by Lindsay Buroker. If you haven't read it, I really suggest you do, because she does a lot of really interesting stuff in terms of genre mashup, because it's fantasy in a way, it's sci-fi in a way, it's steampunk in a way. She does a lot of mashup that actually works really, really well for the story that she tells. And I am on my 4th or 5th read-through of the entire series. There were 8 out when I started reading. I finished them in about a month, which is saying something considering that each book is about 400 to 500 pages long. Yeah, so that is one of my mentor texts for sure. To me, I think Lindsay Buroker is self-published. Mostly I say this because there's a few little, like, really nitpicky things that I have noticed along the lines of homonym usage and little grammatical things that, yes, do show up in professionally published stuff, but not as often. The story is good enough that I can very easily get past that. So that is the mentor text that I'm currently rereading. One of my other really, really big mentor texts is the Ranger's Apprentice series and all associated stories by John Flanagan. Now, I'm just gonna show you why I'm only holding up the first one.
Behold the massive collection of Ranger's Apprentice et al. Yes, they are in the right order, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I can't hold all of those at the same time. That is all 12 books, including the one that's in my hand right now, of the actual Ranger's Apprentice series. The first 5 books in the spin-off series of the Brother Band Chronicles, and the first book of the prequel series to Ranger's Apprentice. But the way Flanagan is able to describe action scenes in particular is really, really, really difficult for me to emulate. I mean, reading it is super easy. He makes all of the technical stuff that you have to deal with in terms of archery and knife work and sword work really, really easy to understand. The way Flanagan is able to make action really, really clear and stay mostly concise is really impressive, plus it actually makes it easier for the reader to handle battle scenes. And that's just in the Ranger's Apprentice stuff. In the Brother Band Chronicles, it focuses more on the Scandinavian sort of culture that they have there. There is a lot of ship stuff in the Brother Band Chronicles. Another really good book that I have found useful as a mentor text is the Graceling trilogy by Kristen K. Short. Now, this only has like sort of 1-to-1 direct book, and then you have a sort of offshoot prequel kind of thing with Fire, but Graceling and Bitterblue relate directly to each other. And just the concept of some of the graces involved in here, if you've read these, you know what I mean by that. Those have helped to educate one of my characters. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail because the first time I tried to record these, I accidentally did a spoiler, and I don't want to do that. These are really, really worth the read, though. So, just sort of some of the magical mechanics of the Graceling trilogy have really helped to educate some of my decisions, have enhanced one of my character's abilities, and all that sort of thing. So even if it's just more conceptual, mentor text can really be a huge boon and much easier to deal with than trying to go into a creative writing class where speculative fiction is more often than not banned to try to get answers in that class, because unless you are really lucky and come across somebody else who is writing in the same genre as you and can help bounce ideas back and forth, you're not going to really be able to, you know, ask the teacher of, like, how do I decide what sort of magical powers this character has? How do I decide what the limits of magic are? That's really something that, A, you have to come up with on your own, and B, you can take a look at what other writers have done, the ones who have already made it, who have been published. What did they do? What were their rules for magic? And then the last sort of mentor text that I'm going to present, I have a bunch more, but that video is not going to ever end, and it's never going to get uploaded, so we'll just deal with... Let's just wait until I do the individual sorts of recommendation videos to go over a lot of my mentor texts. But the last one I'm going to talk about is, for this video anyway, is The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer.
Whoops. Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, so Marissa Meyer's The Lunar Chronicles. This obviously is only the first book. Technically it's the second if you're going by story chronology. But the first book is Cinder, and as you can probably guess, it focuses on the Cinderella story, which, in this case, Cinderella is a cyborg, which is awesome. But this series is essentially a cyberpunk retelling of a whole bunch of different fairy tales, because you obviously have Cinderella with the first book, the second book is Little Red Riding Hood, the third is Rapunzel, and the fourth is Snow White. But there's so much more to it than that. Not only do you have the prequel that is so short and yet so impactful that it just blew my mind when I read it. It's only 220 pages. You can finish it in an afternoon, or at least I did. And you keep having to remind yourself that the protagonist of Fairest, which is the name of the prequel, is a villain. You have to keep reminding yourself of that, because the way Meyer wrote her in the prequel is just so understandable. You completely relate to her, and it's insane. But there it is. And the whole series is just fantastic, and I loved her writing even before I read Fairest, and was just like, I could not believe just how much of a difference 220 pages can make. But she does a lot with all of her characters. You have the downtrodden Cinder as this, you know, unwanted stepdaughter who was adopted in the first place, like 2 weeks before the person who decided to adopt her dies. And you would think that she was gonna end up being just another one of these sort of sad, simpering little girls, but And the same thing with Scarlet, who's Little Red Riding Hood, the same thing with Cress, who is easily the most girly of them, if you don't include Eco, but even she's a badass. Winter is a badass. Just, it's really funny when you have the guys doing what the girls normally do, and doing all the feelings talk and talking about relationships and everything, while the girls are just saying, shut up and let's get this done. And there's a lot that can be taken just from the way that Meyer develops her characters, the way that she describes things, just every single little thing she does has a purpose. And when you first meet Winter in the third book, I think it is, they set up something that's going to be used against her in the fourth book. And it's, you remember it, and if you know what the original stories are like, you see them the first time and go, and you automatically go, this is going to be a problem. And then you're right, you feel really smart. But there are a lot of ways in which Marissa Meyer is extremely respectful of the source material, of the Brothers Grimm fairy tales, of all of the various retellings that have happened over the years. And yet there are also ways in which she says, essentially, nuh-uh, that ain't good enough, let's do it this way. And she really knows her stuff. She got through not only the 4 big fairy tales that the books are named after, but she got through Beauty and the Beast, she got through a few of the other non-Grimm's fairy tales, all while maintaining her own story and her own plot lines, characters, the whole 9 yards. She did an amazing job of that, and I'm really looking forward to the next time I read through the books, just because I know I've missed a lot. I have seen things pop up on Pinterest that were just like, oh, 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 okay. And just that sort of revelation of somebody else in the fandom realizing something and then pointing it out. And I can't even go into detail on most of them because it's just going to spoil everything. Or at least some major plot points. But Meyer is definitely one of my big mentor texts, and she is truly, truly masterful in her craft. If you haven't already read them, I highly recommend it. But that was the last of the mentor texts that I'm going to talk about in this video. Hopefully you found this helpful enough to want to follow me into the last one. See you guys later.